I told you that Homura had a secret lover that you knew nothing about? And what if I told you that the secret lover in question was not Madoka? More on that later. Do you remember that scene after Madoka makes her wish to Kyubey and begins to save all the magical girls past, present, and future? And do you remember this one girl who appeared on the screen for a few seconds before the screen goes completely white? Do you know who this person is and why she's important to not only human history but the Madoka series as well? Not only that, are you also aware of the connection this person has with Homura, or to be more precise, Devil Homura? Well, in this video, I will be explaining to you everything you need to know about this mysterious girl and her connection with Devil Homura. That's all coming up next, so stay tuned. Hoi, 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 hoi. We have the power to do anything! Hello there, my wonderful IMP Nation, how are you? I'm so glad you could make it today. This is Mommy Gasm, aka Mommy Sexual, reporting for duty, and I shall be your imperfect host for today. Hoi, hoi, hoi. Now, have you ever heard of a manga known as Tart Magica? Well, for those that don't know, Tart Magica is a Madoka spin-off manga based loosely around the real life of Jonah Arc, which can be found on Amazon.com. Now, for those of you that are interested in checking this manga out, I've left a link in the description below as well as in my top comment on this video directing you to the manga itself. It is my hope that this video will be valuable to you and helping you determine if this is a manga is worth getting for you or not, since I will be going into more detail about this manga by shedding light on the main heroine in question. So if you find yourself more interested in this manga after watching this video, feel free to check this manga out on Amazon.com. Link once again in the description below and as a top pinned comment. With that said, let's continue on into the video. Hoi, hoi, hoi. Joan of Arc was revered as a hero of the 100-Year War and a saint of the Catholic Church, but her leadership and strength of character in her time did not escape notice of Kyubey, who even in the 15th century sought magical girl candidates for their valuable energy. With her friends and fellow magical girls fighting at her side, Joanna fights the English occupiers of France. Jenna d'Arc, aka Joan of Arc or Tart, is one of the youngest and most influential revolutionaries in all of history. So legendary was she that many a student in Mikikahara Middle School more than likely read up on her in their history books. Joan of Arc, aka Tart, was a Puella Magi, a mystical hero who was given magical powers by an extraterrestrial race to defeat her enemies. Now the question is, what type of connection do Devil Homura and Joan of Arc actually have? Well, no worries, because that info is coming up later on. But first, let's recount the final events of Tart Magica leading up to her death. Also, in case you don't already know, this video will contain spoilers for the ending of Tart Magica. Though considering the ending was already revealed in episode 12 of the Madoka Magica series, I don't think it's really a big deal, but just putting this here as a warning anyways. Now, after the events of history, meaning after the 100-Year War Tart fought with her fellow magical girls, at the end of it all, she finds herself tied to a stake where she is to be burned, for she was deemed a heretic who claimed to have heard the voice of God. Yet, even with these circumstances, Tart's fate didn't falter, for she knew that God's voice was still there, whispering into her ear at her final moments. The voice of God was not masculine, however, rather it was seductive, collected, and sophisticated female voice that whispered comforting words as the fires neared her toes. And when the flames consumed her, Jenna felt no pain, for her magic allowed her to block pain, but her soul gem perished within the flames, guaranteeing her demise. Not that it mattered, for a legend known as the Law of Cycles had taken her to heaven. Tart didn't know what to expect, and then she found someone. Who is that someone, you ask? None other than Devil Homura, as she herself welcomes Tart to the afterlife, proclaiming herself as the goddess of this realm. Now, it's at this point that Devil Homura gave Tart her first command in the form of a request. Devil Homura mentions that Madoka Kaname, who she loves and admires, is also the savior of all magical girls and did everything, even going as far as to sacrifice her life for the sake of saving everyone. And from Homura's perspective, she was able to help her by relieving her and shouldering her burdens as God and giving her the happy life she deserves. But the question still remains, why was Tart summoned to be before Devil Homura? Devil Homura goes on to explain that though she loves Madoka with all her heart and soul, that Madoka deserves to fall in love with someone better, for she saw herself as the devil and Madoka as an unreachable goddess that doesn't deserve to be tainted by such an evil being like her. But Tart reminded Devil Homura of Madoka in many ways, and unlike Madoka, Devil Homura had no reason to not have her way with Tart. Not to mention, she knew Tart was a woman of God and that she would more than likely obey her anyway. Homura also knew that she could use Tart to help her keep an eye on Madoka, and also use Tart to cure her own loneliness by having Tart keep her company. It's at this point that a beautiful pairing is born in the form of Devil Homura x Tart, seeing as the two of them would engage in lesbian lip-locking and spicy French kissing. Now, I just want to mention that this story of Devil Homura and Tart was written by Riz Hawkwood, who has an account on the Madoka Magica Amino app. I will link their Amino account as well as this actual story below in the description for those that want to check it out for themselves. And I want to personally thank them for making this story, since it literally gave birth to one of my favorite Madoka Magica pairings in the form of Devil Homura and Tart. So yeah, be sure to give the author some love after you finish watching this video. But yeah, the story this person wrote showcases a what-if scenario of what happens to Joan of Arc as she is in the mix of dying and being taken in by the law of cycles. Though rather than Madoka being the one to grant her eternal peace, it's actually Devil Homura that is giving her salvation, which I personally think is interesting, since this implies that the events of Joan of Arc being taken in by the law of cycles is taking place after the events of Rebellion, and sort of makes you wonder what the Madoka series would be like if this actually happened toward the end of the third movie. I mean, just imagine it for a second. What if, when the fourth movie comes out, imagine if much of what we saw in the concept trailer actually played out in this said new movie, only with Tart being added to the mix of everything as Homura's lover and knight who fights in service of her. And it also makes you think about how the law of cycles system would change after the events of the third movie, and seeing Homura in a position to greet and give magical girls salvation, I personally think is a nice possible twist, and could very well be what is happening now that Madoka has been temporarily placed out of commission. So yeah, as you can probably tell, I really love this story and the idea of Tart and Homura meeting and becoming partners / lovers, and I honestly think this should happen within a fourth Madoka movie continuation. Anyways, let me randomly share with you another Devil Homura pairing I like, which is Devil Homura x Sayaka. Or you can check out this video if you want a more wholesome inspiration video about Homura and how to use her life as inspiration to never give up. Anyways, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to join the IMP Nation if you're new, and share this video with anyone you know that loves Madoka, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace!